All right, so before I introduce the panelists, I just want to give everyone a little bit of context on Leen and why it is that we host these panels. So for those of you that don't know, Leen is a unified API and data fabric for security. We build and maintain connectors with dozens of different security products, and we make it really easy for other security product companies to bring that data in a normalized fashion and basically build integrations to whatever tools that they want. This position that we have in the market is very fortuitous. It gives us a great horizontal view into what's happening in the industry. We talk to a lot of founders. We talk to their customers who are security practitioners, and this gives us a great pulse on what's happening in the industry. So the questions that we hear people talking about and the themes that are top of mind for them are ones that we want to learn about, and we also believe in building in public. So you can think of this panel and these types of events as an expression of us building in public. We send a build in public newsletter. Speak to one of us on the Leen team after the panel if you would like to subscribe to that or follow us on LinkedIn, but this is another forum where we can just share those learnings. So this is as much to sort of satiate our curiosity as it is yours. So with that, I'd love to introduce the panelists to you, starting with Adrian, who is the CISO at Tools for Humanity. Adrian is the CISO, has also been the CISO at Atlassian. Please, Adrian, have a seat. Check out Tools for Humanity if you haven't heard of them. They're the ones building the WorldCoin protocol. Very, very cool stuff. In addition to being the CISO at Atlassian, he was previously the Director of Security and Privacy at Nest, the Director of Android Security at Google. He's also been the VP at Joint, where he led global GTM efforts, and Manager of Product Security at Adobe. So clearly someone with a ton of experience. Thanks for being here, Adrian. Next, we've got Devin, who's the CISO at Menlo. I think actually...
Am I in the wrong spot?
Yeah, I think if you sit here and then, we'll go in that order.
I'm going to go that way.
I think so, yeah.
Right and left. I'm working on it.
Devin is the CISO at Menlo, which is a leading cloud security platform. Previously, he was CISO at Blackhawk Network, a global fintech leader, and held senior roles at Guidebook, Mandiant, the Federal Reserve System, Red Team Security, and Target. Devin is also a mentor for OWASP and the Information Security Leadership Foundation, and serves as an Evanta governing body co-chair as well. Thanks for being here, Devin.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Shirish, formerly EVP of Cybersecurity at Wells Fargo. This is quite recent, as of this December. He's now advising startups. We were just talking about this, so if you're a founder, maybe reach out to him and get his advice on some things. Previously, Shirish was the CISO at Visa Europe, and later an SVP of Cybersecurity and M&A at Visa. He was also at Oracle, where he was the VP of Identity Management and Director of Engineering. He's had a 30-year career where he's built and led global cybersecurity teams, developing internal tools and integrating numerous vendor solutions along the way. Thanks for being here, Shirish. So, gentlemen, I want to start with a couple of high-level questions just to give folks an understanding of who you are and the type of experience you've had, and also some trends for the industry. So, my first question is, how many security tools, since this is a panel about procuring tools and buying tools and understanding that, how many security tools did you purchase in 2024? How many do you think you're going to purchase in 2025? So we know kind of how the industry is trending. And the last one's kind of a fun one. How many procurement processes have you been through in your career, like ballpark for security tools? Just so people understand like who they're getting advice from today. Whoever wants to start. Go for it.
You're retired, so your answer is 0 for 2025. So that's
exactly whatever the plan was for Wells Fargo. Let's put it that way.
Easy answer.
Now you're running your home network. You got to get 65.
I can give. So I think they already too many. What's happening is already too many tools in house. So there's actually a bigger move to reduce tools, and then focus on just a very few selected tools that you feel will be more modern and move us in the right direction. It's like, where's the puck going as opposed to where we were? So that's where we're trying to head to. So it was really to reduce tools. So I would say, how many were we trying to acquire? Probably a few, right? And What was the other question you're saying? In whole lifetime, I mean, it's countless. I mean, it's too many, but probably at least 30, 40, between about, I don't know, maybe 100, I don't know.
2024, I think we only, maybe about 2 tools. I'm smaller, not Wells Fargo. So I think, so they're going to be purchasing a lot more. With this environment, it's been basically a net zero budget, right? So I'll say like self-funding, like am I going to remove something to save that budget and then invest elsewhere? So you're always looking at all your tools and self-fund, and you really just got to fight for anything you think that is going to be net new. There in my lifetime, probably hundreds. Yeah, I have no idea how many tools I've went through. Quite a bit. Slowed a lot after though. I feel like this economic situation going on is slowing down quite a bit. Sorry.
No, I'm not even sure what this economic situation is that we are in at the moment.
Hey, me either.
That's part of the fun. So I joined Tools for Humanity last year and was the first CISO to join the company. I think we were on a growth and still are on a growth pattern that's pretty fast up and to the right is the direct direction. When I joined, we were just beginning to build the security program, and we had a few tools that were already in place, but we've ended up basically replacing those few tools and then supplementing until we've now got a full suite. Our tech stack is pretty clean, so we don't have to deal with lots of different clouds and legacy infrastructure and things like that. But I think all in, we probably now have a dozen independent vendors. Some of them are able to provide, broad range. Some of them are pretty niche, but I feel like we're in a pretty good spot. We'll probably add a couple next year, and I can't imagine trying to manage more than that. It always blows my mind when I hear statistics like that there are 100 tools being used by a security organization inside of, say, a large bank or something like that, because I just can't even, just dealing with the paperwork and the sales guys that are calling all the time, like, when would you ever get any work done? But I feel like that's a reasonable number, and it's probably more than I would like. I would love to have it be 3 or 4, but there just aren't robust solutions that cover enough ground to have it be that few.
Yeah. And probably hundreds of solutions that you've
how many over my career? Actually, it's funny. Not that many. I mean, so most of my career I was doing product software security, right? So the number of tools bought by Android was basically 0. The number of tools bought by Macromedia and Adobe before that, the tools didn't exist. Like, there were a handful of SaaS tools at that point. So there were a few that we used, but most of them we didn't get a lot of value from. I moved to being a CISO when I went to Atlassian. So that was the first time that all of a sudden I saw the deluge of, oh, you must have budget, and started having somebody contacting me every week. We already had most of the stuff in place at Atlassian, so didn't end up acquiring all that many. So literally the last year is probably as many as I had acquired prior to that in my career.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I asked that question just to give the audience a sense of, if there's a trend out there, these guys have probably seen it, right, in terms of how procurement is done. And I think the objective of this panel is, because we have a lot of founders for the panelists in this audience. We also have people that are working at security companies. We have some practitioners. So I think your insights will help, of course, founders understand how to break through to particularly large organizations like the ones you've worked for, and also for other practitioners to understand how they should be thinking about the procurement process. So I think let's start a little bit. I think motivation theory is something that's really important to understand when it comes to B2B sales, right? It's this enigmatic thing. How do you actually sell and break through into these really large organizations? So I'm curious, as far as security goes, like, what are some of the main motivations that you folks have faced in your, or what has the impetus been to go from, I think I need this tool, to, I need this thing right now, we need to send out a bunch of RFPs, and what have those factors typically been? And have those been consistent over the years?
I guess I'll jump in. I don't think I have this great framework of what a tool I need next, or it's mainly risk, right? So it's evolving all the time. and it's kind of in my head. I was a former pen tester, and everything I look at is always attack chain. So I always look at I think nonstop about my environment and where the risks are, and whether or not I need a tool, or can we build it internally? Can we use native tools? And then, it's a lot of talking with the security team. I'm definitely not the type that says we need this and we go do that. It's talking with my team and stakeholders to see if that would help. For instance, I just purchased like what's that called? Basically a PAM solution. So it's like, what's that called? Essentially, credentials immediately. What is that?
CyberArk or HashiCorp?
Not a startup. Anyways, that. So a newer version of CyberArk. But it was actually a win for my engineering team, because now, before it was just like getting access was such a pain, and was supporting it.
Teleport.
Actually, do we want to? We don't have to name the tool.
That's fine.
But it was a win. So that's always in the security world. In my mind, like if you're like creating ease and security at the same time, it's a big win. It was an easy sell. It was really easy internally. Like, we got engineering support. Like, look at they can now access servers to support them much easier and also more secure. So I don't know what the question was, but sorry if I went the other way or ranted.
No, that makes sense. Anyone else?
So at least we would think about it in like 3 basic buckets of security work, right? One is just nailing the basics, patching and just vulnerability, just all that basic malware, DLP, DDoS, all those basic things. Then modernizing. Over time, you always accumulate things that are old, and and technologies that are old, and you need to move towards some more modern technologies. And the third thing is innovation. So, but in each of those areas, there might be a need, like in vulnerability management or DLP or DDoS. The technology again might be old, or you might need to really replace with something much more modern to really solve the problem, because you're seeing too many gaps. So then the risk, I think, really, as Devin was pointing out, really drives. The 2 questions to ask is like, why do anything now at all? Right? Why do anything, and then why now? Those 2 questions, right? And maybe the answer is, hey, I don't need it now. I need it, but maybe next year is okay. You need it now because of some risk issue. Then you look at like the solution from that perspective. So those 2 things really drive like the importance of why, and it could be like ransomware came up much more in the last few years, and that's driving a lot of people to say, hey, I really need a solution for this. So the threat vector landscape and what's happening in that landscape drives often decisions that are maybe sooner than what you would have thought. Because if they can break into like banks, and so that's like crucial, and not just banks, like healthcare services. So that's becoming a very important thing to make sure that you have a reasonable solution for that.
As you are both talking, I'm sort of retrofitting my decision framework and trying to figure out what it looks like. So I think there's an underlying structure of a compliance framework, or somebody did some kind of an assessment and said, you need all of these tools. Yeah. So that's the first thing, right? You baseline, I have a solution for each of the things that somebody told me I need to have. And it could be an auditor, it could be a review, it could be a regulatory framework, something like that. Now you have a baseline. The next thing you have is those tools all start running, and 10% of them make your life harder than it was before you had that tool. And so those ones need to be changed. 10% per year, right?
He's being kind.
So their false positive rate is too high, the reliability is too low, they don't actually find the things that they're supposed to be finding, et cetera. And so there's a constant churn of existing vendors that you need to rotate out. And then there's 2 other sources. One is there's some risk that pops up. Oh, ransomware. We hadn't been hearing about that for the last 30 years, so I guess now we need to fix it. So that is something that happens. And then the second is an executive or board member says, you need to talk to this company that I just invested in. Or you find a particularly compelling outreach or problem in your own sense, and so you sort of explore that. So I think those are probably the 4 things that drive looking at a potential solution. And the risk on all of them is, does solving this problem create a new problem that is bigger than this problem? And that's constantly what's in my mind is, will deploying this tool actually make either my security posture worse in some instances, right? Does deploying this agent into the kernel mean that I might take out the entire company, or perhaps even the entire Western Hemisphere? Does death by 1,000 cuts because this tool is going to report on every single vulnerability, including the ones that I don't need to fix, end up overwhelming my team to the point where they won't fix anything. So those are some of the things that I always have as a trade-off, is how does this solution actually make life better rather than worse?
Great. And I think you all touched on this, which kind of leads me to my other question is, clearly you're not doing this in a vacuum, right? There are people that are typically involved in this procurement process that are going to be directly or indirectly impacted by the choices that you and your positions make. So can you talk a little bit about that? And I know you've all worked at varying sizes of companies, so maybe your answers will vary quite a bit, but I think that'll be really interesting for the audience to hear. Like, what does that process look like? What does the internal buy-in process kind of look like? And who's involved? Who are the stakeholders typically that are involved?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll go first this time, and we'll keep rotating. So I've always had two partners that have been sort of first and foremost in mind, and they're the people that actually do the work. And that's whoever the head of engineering is for the organization and whoever the head of IT is for the organization. And early at any one of these organizations, the first thing you try to establish is like, what are the things that you're responsible for and what are the things that I'm responsible for? And what's striking to me is how often that conversation hasn't happened in the past when I talk to other heads of security. And there isn't alignment on what that means. So the classic successful conversation in my mind is, you're the head of engineering, your job is to fix all the things. I'm the head of security, my job is to make sure you know what all the things are that you need to fix. And to find the best possible way to resolve those things if there's any automation that's out there. And to make sure that gets deployed and get it deployed as quickly as possible. And that sort of understanding and getting to that early on, so that as the tools get rolled out that alert you to real issues, you know that those need to be resolved and they're going to be resolved by the engineering team, and that fixing the things is not the security team's problem. Is I think one of the things that's really, really important early on. And then understanding, here's how we're going to roll out new tools, new techniques in a way that is minimally disruptive. So that's the second conversation you have to have with each of them, which is interesting to me when I talk to vendors, because so rarely have they thought about that. I'm like, when I turn it on, what's going to happen? What's going to find 50,000 things? Cool. The next day when I turn it off, then what's going to happen? Well, you're going to have a backlog of things that you know about your environment that you can't fix. So I've just created bad information. I've put more risk into the environment because now I have to worry about that disclosure. It's like, okay, what's the mechanism for working with my partner in engineering to notify them about the things that they can fix, because they have to be able to do it, tomorrow? And then how will that ratchet, because it literally is a ratchet, over the next 6 months, 9 months, whatever period of time, so that they are constantly able to keep up with that flow, so that they're able to follow through on their obligation. And how have you, as a security tools provider, thought through what that process is going to look like and made it easily integrated into their workflow, easily integrated into the set of toolings? How do they track issues? Do you have integration with Jira? Do you have integration with Linear? Do you have integration with whatever? How do you know when they've been resolved? Do you do automated retesting to make sure that it's been fixed? Like all of those basic things around what it means to actually fix a thing need to be part of the solution. Otherwise, it's not really a solution. So those are some of the things that I think about early on in the conversations.
Great.
I like what you said there. I'm stealing this from somebody, but they said there's like 3 budgets in security. There's like people budget, tooling budget, and then personal capital budget. Mm-hmm. So like your stakeholder, personal capital, I would argue, is like one of the most important budgets. For the longest time, security, we've been breaking things, and now we're really like don't want to break anything. So like the stakeholder buy-in, depending on what tool it is and who it's going to touch, but it's ultimately going to touch something and create work. I love what you said. Like you should know ahead of time. I've ripped out tools in a POC phase, and not even POC. Like we bought it and we started rolling it out, and it caused so much friction that I was just like done. It's over. So I feel like that vendor could have worked better with me to actually get it right before I started rolling it out, and creating so much friction where it's like we're not going to even use this tool anymore, and we'll just eat the year that we bought it for. So yeah, it's all stakeholders. I always like look at a tool first, but I let my security engineering team, like they're the ones they're gonna like really dig into it, and I let them choose it. Like I'm never the one that's choosing the actual product. I'll say, hey, this looks cool. I saw this, and send it their way. And they're the ones that really, bang on the keyboard and figure out. And then I'll do a lot of talking with like maybe senior leadership in engineering, or if it's IT, I actually have IT, so that makes it pretty easy in that sense. Yeah, I think stakeholder buy-in is huge, and setting expectations of that, of what it will mean when it's turned on and being used.
No, makes sense. I mean, yeah, I think at least ensuring you know about what friction is going to be there and take it on consciously. In some cases, there may be no choice, but other cases, wherever you can reduce it to the maximum possible. Example, there's been a case where, like for security testing, we had introduced a tool, one of the companies I was at, where the testing was given to the developer so they could do it themselves before, rather than it being done. So they loved it. So, but again, it had to be done in a way so that, the teams work closely together. We piloted it, tried it out, and put all the other things around it so it was very seamless. So the app teams, the other teams, and also the operational team that's actually going to run it, they all need to be involved in understanding it, the beast, what it is. And that needs to be part of the ROI discussion, right? So what's the ROI should be, once you include all of these things in some kind of quantified manner, then you can say, okay, here's the value it's going to bring me, here's the cost.
I mean this in the best way. ROI discussions are always a joke, because when a vendor puts forward an ROI analysis, they're like, well, this tool is going to cost $10,000. I'm like, yes, it's $10,000, and then it's 500 person hours per week.
Yeah.
And so it's like $1 billion worth of time to deal with that $10,000 tool. So it's just fascinating to me how over-index ROI conversations are on cash as opposed to time.
Yeah, it's the tool costs, both like one time and ongoing.
Yeah.
It's the deployment cost, right? Initial and ongoing. And it's the operational cost of running it, not just at IT, but also the other. So but we need, as the vendor will obviously give them their viewpoint. From the company perspective, we have to do that full due diligence. And if the vendor does it, then that will actually become like a first-class vendor, because they're really looking at the cost. And then it's in their interest to optimize it, then we're really aligned. Because now they're really trying to optimize everything, like automating all the right things so the friction is low, even for deployment, operation, all that stuff. So, I mean, once you do all these things, and the other teams, at least in larger organizations, will be the finance team and the procurement team, right? So the finance team is more for just ensuring that do you have budget, and then, what the approvals are for that. And usually they want to know, like, what's the process how did you make the decision? Is it like just somebody in the, trust me, I mean, sometimes like, why, who made this decision? This is ridiculous. We shut down the project. Like, I didn't understand it. But you need to have who made the decision, why, there's something, and then the procurement people then help with the negotiation, and they have the process around it. There's tools to understand the vendor viability, and there's like all these rapid rating, all these things. So there's a much more formal process to look at those aspects as well. And if you do it earlier in the process, it's easier and if vendors actually already have some of those things laid out, then they like SOC 2 compliance, just some basic stuff needs to be all done. If you don't have it, then let's not even play the game. So sometimes doing that thing earlier helps, because then you can just say, hey, this is just baseline, I have all this stuff. Now let's talk about the value, ROI, all the rest of the stuff, and see if it makes sense. Honestly, if it doesn't make sense, it's better for both parties to part much earlier, right? Doesn't make sense, it's okay. Let's not waste our time. The worst thing is wasting our time and at the end, cutting it loose.
What really strikes me about your answers is that you actually didn't bring up procurement and these other teams until much later in your answers. You folks have been mostly talking about the operational impact and the partners that you have who are going to be using this on a regular basis. But I feel like from a vendor perspective, we know, because we talk to a lot of vendors, they over-index on the front of that process a lot more. They're like, oh, I'm going to have to get through finance and compliance and procurement and whatever else. And they don't maybe think as much about the latter end of this process and what this thing will actually look like once they've made the sale and the ongoing costs, as you said.
And is it a key need right now? So the procurement and finance guys will not know any of that stuff. Right. The CISO, head of engineering, they know, is it really important, and do you have budget right now? If you don't, we'll talk next year. But what's the point? Let's not waste each other's time.
Yeah, because 90% of the vendors that I talk to never get to talk to my finance team, because I never have decided that they're worth thinking about having a contract with. But yeah, I can see where a company worries about that last hurdle to the point where they don't even see the first 10 that are tripping them up.
I feel like that hurdle, though, I'm always helping push that along.
Yeah, by then you're
internally.
committed.
Absolutely.
Like you want it. So
No, and also, I mean, they don't have the technical depth and understanding and the domain understanding that we do. So we really have to help them like put the story together and like walk them through it. So absolutely, I agree with you.
my legal team always tells me SOC 2 is really important. So we make sure that we don't make sure of anything, actually.
Actually, legal is important from another aspect, I realize, because in some cases you need to bring in legal if it's like, for example, if it's you're mandating some policy that's going to impact all your users. Because like even whether it's globally, there's regulations, so you just need to make sure that privacy, some of those things are properly met. And we can prepare all that and give it to them, but the needs and different regulations across, like whether it's like APAC, Europe, Asia, the US, the different regulations that need to be met for privacy. So if all your users are being impacted, like all employees or all, then you need to just be careful that some new solution they're introducing, there's no issues there for that.
Yeah. I think security procurement is so interesting because it's so different than most of B2B SaaS, because it's so fundamental. It touches so much core data and so many core processes within your organization that it's almost hard sometimes to POC these products. I'm actually curious how, in your careers, you've gone about that process and anticipated some of these pitfalls that you're talking about where, hey, if I turn this thing on, is it going to create a nightmare scenario for my engineering partner or for my compliance partner? So how do you anticipate that without, handing over all of your data to the vendor and from day one? It's not like implementing a chat solution or a project management solution where you can roll it out in phases and test it in kind of a vacuum. So curious to get your thoughts on that.
That's a very good question. I think like in large organizations, what you would do is that you look to the Gartner quadrant and so on. You have the ability to innovate, ability to execute. You want the people on the top right? Because you need people that can execute, that are really like that. And basically, it's been tested by thousands of organizations. You are not like one of the early ones that are like going to have the arrows in your back as pioneers, right? You don't want that. So that's one way to really make sure that there. And the second thing is a lot of referenceable customers that I personally talk to them, saying, hey, what was your actual experience? What are the pitfalls? What happened in deployment? How long have you been in production? So some of those things help reduce the risk of, and again, referenceable customers like us, like the organization you're in, not like a referenceable small customer, just same size as you, same characteristic, and then that helps like give more comfort. Apart from your own testing, there's POC testing, but to your point, you cannot do it in production. You can only do it in test environments. But these other data points can help inform your decision, and you need to document and show that this is all the stuff you've done homework to just make sure the risk is reduced. And then get some assurances from them that, hey, if something happens, they'll help solve it quickly so that you can, issues that come up, you can solve them quickly. So just some of the things that you can do to help reduce the risk of bad deployment.
Yeah, I don't know we test and, put it through the ringer in a test environment, slowly, depending on what it is, slowly rolling it out. But like you saw what happened to CrowdStrike, that's a pretty known, vendor, and that took down, felt like the whole US or world. So it can happen. So you do need to go in there eyes wide open with any tool of the potential damage. We look at tools, and sometimes we will say, like, if they have some integration that's coming into they want some permission that we just don't feel comfortable with, we just say we don't want that feature. We don't care. We don't need that. We look at that because everything has an integration now, I feel like, or wants some plug into your cloud environment.
I think the question of whether something's on a critical path for operations.
Sure.
And can it work in a way that isn't critical path? There's been a lot of advancement in cloud where you can do side scanning rather than actually having an agent. You can do monitoring that's external rather than having an agent. And that helps a lot.
Yeah.
As we're going through the discussion, I'm also realizing that 5 or 6 years ago, if a security vendor came to me and said, you'll have to put some of your data into our cloud, we would have been like, no, 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 no. I don't know if I've even thought about that in the last 2 years. I think at this point, so much is in the cloud and so many tools have their data in the cloud that the idea of what's your on-prem solution is no longer like top of mind. So some of it is just evolution of what risk looks like inside these organizations. And the other thing that I would flag is selling to security is somewhat unique, that there's no optimism. Like there's just none. Even if you're selling to the IT person, somebody is probably pushing the IT person, and that person is super optimistic that this app is going to solve all their problems. But I think when you're selling a security tool directly to a security organization, like it's all questions, it's all doubt, all the way down. And so it's a really hard sell. So the question is there any way to tweak the product offering so you can get somebody who's an optimist involved, right? Some of the most successful tools recently have been ones where they come at it from an engineering slant.
Yeah.
I'll give an example. It's not one that you're expecting, which is at Atlassian, we were a Splunk customer because observability was something being driven not by the security organization, and we used Splunk for everything from a logging standpoint. And so it was purely driven by the developer organization, but was amazing from a security observability standpoint because we had all the logs. And they had a shorter retention policy for the non-security things, et cetera. But the fact that that infrastructure was being utilized first by engineering and second by security meant that we had infinite budget. Yeah. And no objection to adding a few more hooks, et cetera, et cetera. So anywhere where you can get that kind of sort of first mover advantage coming from non-security making the acquisition, it's incredibly valuable.
Fair point. And in most security teams too, if some engineering teams buying a security tool, they're like, yeah, sure, buy it, we'll take it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say no. That's a good point.
That's a great nugget of wisdom for the founders in the audience. If you can somehow put this in the engineering team's budget, it changes. It sounds like it's a game changer.
And I think that's what Zscaler did. They actually went after like networks, and so there wasn't really a security thing.
I mean, we're not strictly here to prognosticate about what the security industry is going to look like 10 years from now, but I think security functionality incorporated into the tools that do other stuff is the way that it's all going to go. I was chatting with a gentleman earlier today, and I think it's all going to end up at the platform level. It's either going to be AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, or maybe if you're a developer, it's going to end up in your development environment in GitHub or GitLab. And like I feel like that consolidation is what we're going to have. And I don't know where it's going to be, but I think the land of buying 100 different tools and then trying to get them all to work together is not a land anybody wants to live in. I think we're going to move out of that fairly quickly. Great.
Well, the other thing I'm kind of curious about, based on what you've all been talking about, and for context, if you folks aren't familiar, there are about 4,000 security vendors today and 10,000 plus products, right? So this is kind of what led us to have this panel, is because we were thinking, how the hell do people like you make decisions? So you've talked about that a little bit. Maybe if you want to dive into some specific examples, and this is, you feel free to name vendors because this is positive publicity for them, of things that have made a vendor stand out in procurement processes that you've been involved in. What did they think about that you don't expect them to, or what differentiated them from the average vendor?
I could start like one like automation tool that we used. One, they spent a lot of time with me and trying to understand my use cases and needs. During the POC, I think they hammered out like 5 of my use cases. So I knew as soon as I turned it on, it was like, okay, I actually you completed everything that I was going to buy this tool for. Now it's just green field. So I felt very confident there. But it's like anything else, there's a relationship building. It was a long buying process, but they just, I guess, stuck with it and continued to show value. And but I really enjoyed that they worked with my team so early on and just like when we bought it, it was up and running. It was going for the use cases we wanted.
Yeah.
So that was helpful. Nobody wants shelfware.
We've had a few instances in the last year where the trial phase and doing the POC and testing got us to a point where we identified issues that needed to be fixed, gave us some measure of how effective our environment was at managing certain types of risks, and gave us visibility into what this tool would look like into the future. So we could see, we got to fix some things. We have some sense for where we're at, and I can see ongoing value, because that often is also the question is,
Sure.
After I fixed all the issues that found the first time around, what's the subsequent life cycle going to look like? Will I continue to see value, or will this wane over time? And so being able to see all of those things at the moment we began to deploy was really confidence building. And then, of course, they have a backlog of, here are all the things that we're going to add. It's like, okay, great.
I actually like hearing that, like their feature set of things going forward. Yeah. Like that's gives me confidence in the vendor. Maybe start thinking about I can remove other stuff.
Yeah.
So I actually really like when they have, even moving forward, like those touch points, like don't just like when they, selling process is not done after you buy it, like keep a touch point. There's so many vendors that I don't even know who, whatever they call them, customer success person is or whatever. Mm-hmm. But they're kind of out of sight, out of mind to me now. I know we have it. I know it's doing, I don't know how good it's doing. I don't know, maybe you need to look at something else, but knowing your roadmap is huge to keep that stickiness.
One thing that's been really interesting, actually, for a long time, I've held the belief that all of these tools are just probabilities, right? 90% effectiveness, 80% effectiveness. They're missing a bunch of stuff. So in my back of my mind, I've always thought if you run 3 or 4 tools that overlap, then you actually can kind of evaluate the effectiveness of one tool versus the other. But each of them have fit themselves into this little niche and defined CNAP versus PCAM, like whatever, right? And so they've intentionally constructed these gaps so you can't get overlap. And so you can't actually measure effectiveness. But what we're starting to see is for cloud infrastructure and for developer tools, there actually is starting to be overlap. And what was interesting recently was we deployed some new infrastructure tools where suddenly it's like it's telling me my dependencies are out of date. It's like, but we also caught that with Dependabot inside of GitHub and inside of our repositories. I'm like, but is it the same? Did anybody check that? And so initially the team was really uncomfortable that there were 2 tools both scanning for effectively the same thing until they realized that they weren't getting the same results. And then I was like, oh, hang on, this is really exciting. And so that's part of where I think the roadmap is really interesting. Yeah. As some of these tools become more comprehensive, their willingness to step on toes of other tools and to give you some visibility into the effectiveness of themselves and the other tools, I think is really, really interesting. So in that sense, I'm pretty excited about the sprawl that is the way some of these tools are ingesting more capability. Open source has helped a lot there. It's easy to add a SAST scanner. You just go grab SemGraph.
Yeah, I can give a couple of examples. One was like I think in large organizations, if you want to go with smaller companies, it'll be more for really point solutions because the impact of it going wrong is much smaller. So there's too much risk to like do a widely deployed solution across the whole enterprise, across the world, across 50, 100 countries. No. Then you'll go with like a much more like leader quadrant and much more proven solution. You just cannot take the risk. So and for that, like for example, I know picked like a cloud solution from one of the top cloud vendors, amazing solution early in the journey, but we believed in it. So it's like, it's going to go and you can co-develop with them and really take it places. So it's more like they don't quite have everything you need right now, but they're going to head there. They have the budget. They have the commitment, all that stuff, and they're going to get there. So that's more from that perspective. For the smaller vendors, there were like a couple of times we picked like point solutions where very useful. They did the job extremely well. The cost was reasonable, and we could prove that that this was the best in the market for what it was trying to do. And then that worked out really well. So that's a couple of times we actually did that. But we need to make sure that, again, the impact is low. It's maybe offline or during development phase or something where still extremely useful, but if something goes wrong, you have time to fix it. It's not like, like a 0-day bug or something, you're screwed.
Right. Classic question. What if I only deploy this in staging? Right. Like, will that still work? Will it prevent all the bad things, or does it have to be in production? Is a good screening on those high-risk tools.
We've talked a lot about sort of intrinsic motivations and compliance requirements, what certain team members on your team might want. How about triggers that maybe the vendors, something that they've done that caught your eye in particular? And I'll use an example that I like. This is not a non-security example. There was, not sure if the people in the audience are familiar, there was a campaign that Brex, the credit card company, ran called the Champagne Campaign, right? This was pre-pandemic. So in San Francisco, when a company got funded, they would send them a bottle of champagne and a handwritten note and say, hey, congratulations, if you ever want to talk to us and you need a credit card solution. And this is a great case study for two reasons. One, because it's very unique and it was very effective. And two, they got great ROI on it. So I'm just curious, have there been any such sort of surprising things that vendors have done or something that's caught your eye in particular that made them stand out from the 10,000 others that exist?
In a good way.
In a good way. We'll talk about the bad. We'll talk about the bad in a second because I think it's also important, but in a good way.
I kind of like what you're doing here. Like, you're almost creating a community. Some vendors do that. They have events. I've been to the event, and there's customers and prospective customers. We just start talking with peers, and they talk about how they're utilizing. Before you know it, all these people are talking how they utilize it, and and you're getting ideas how you could bring it in. So just I like when they create those communities of. Not that I want another event to have to go to, but it's nice to hear other people using the tool. Kind of similar what you said earlier, but you have confidence there, but also how are they using it and implementing it and just getting ideas of what you can do with it, and goes a long way for me at least.
Just a disclaimer, this is not a scripted conversation. We didn't tell Devin to say that. So thank you, though. Curious if you, Adrian or Shirish, have any other thoughts?
I agree. I mean, and also if you're kind of sending interesting material that's like independent material that's like supporting a case, saying this is a key problem and you're solving it well, whatever it may be, right? And those things are useful and like just this whole community building is certainly a good aspect because it's going to help everybody. So I think I agree with you, and that's like a really cool thing you guys are doing.
Any examples that come to mind for you, Adrian? Yeah,
it's interesting. I think security is, at least from a product standpoint, really bad at community. I think developer tools do a very good job of creating forums where there's an exchange of ideas and people describe the solution that they have, and there's sample code and there's evangelists that help guide that. And I've had countless conversations with vendors where I'm just like, I'm sure 10 of your customers have exactly the same environment that I have, like exactly the same. And how could I just deploy what they've done? So I think there's an opportunity there. I've had a few conversations with vendors where they're actually thinking that way. Like, what are the templates that can be created? What's the forum that exists for those templates to be shared from one vendor to the other? If I'm writing detections, how do I know that same detection is being, like, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there that's been relatively untapped, which doesn't answer your question, which is what have I seen that works really well, but it's a hope and a dream that eventually there will be some vendors that realize that their superpower is the ability to connect two different customers and have those customers do the job of the company. Because it's insane to me that every single security team is doing the same thing. And there's so little economies of scale that have been generated across all those vendors.
To that point, one vendor did something which I requested them to do this for us, which is like, across all your customers, give us the best practices.
Yeah.
Give us the top, and they wrote a fantastic, I said, it'll help all your customers. So they wrote, so you don't need to tell us which customer, because security, we don't want to tell everybody what we are doing, what our environment is, because then you're telling hackers and hackers can get in. So we always have that fear. rightfully or otherwise. So, but if they give us the best practices, then we can see how they apply to us and what they have seen as working in other customers. They don't need to tell us the names of the customers, anything, just the top 10, 20, 30 best practices. So that document was extremely useful. So if you see that, if you have, as you build out your customer use case and you build out best practices and that knowledge you gain across customers, that is tremendously valuable.
Although I love the idea of a vendor saying, here are 3 people who have deployed a solution similar to your environment, and I'd be happy to make an introduction of you to them. And have that be part of the sales process.
But it's like still a private conversation. So that's a reference. It's a private nobody's going to put that out publicly, but they can say, yes, you can talk to these guys. That, the referenceable customers, you have to do that. You have to take a similarly sized customer or similar domain and say, hey, I want to talk to somebody that's deployed it in production and have a deeper conversation with them about it.
Yeah, earlier in my career, I was a consultant, and there was a guy, Joel, if anybody knows Joel, who did it. He was our sales guy, but he did a spectacular job of identifying 2 potential customers and just introducing them to each other. And that created such a web of trust around Joel that it was super easy for him to close deals because he was, not only were they a referral, but they were also somebody that shared a problem, and he spent most of his time just introducing customers to one another. And it worked spectacularly well. And I haven't seen that replicated anywhere else. I certainly haven't seen it from anybody that's like selling an actual tool, but I think it could go a long way towards establishing trust and a sense of community and sort of rallying that. So that's interesting.
And plus, I'm sure Joel and the company learned a lot from these interactions and conversations, and they realized what's really top of mind for across all these customers, fed that into the product and made it better. So it's like a self-fulfilling, like a virtuous cycle, if you will.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. It sounds so obvious when you say it, but in general, security has this mindset of us against the bad guys, and everyone's kind of on the same team and working together. So why not share these best practices, at least within the same vendor network with other customers? It makes a lot of sense to me. Well, I want to flip the equation on its head. Like, how about on things that vendors have done that you would absolutely not recommend? I'm sure there are tons, but why don't you pick some of the themes that have kind of stood out to you? Devin, you already talked a little bit about a tool that you implemented where it just created a bunch of noise. So yeah, other examples like that are very practical that people should know about. Common pitfalls, maybe.
I can maybe mention 2. One of them was like, they went to the board and the board said, look at this thing. And I said, you can do whatever you want, but I'm going to still give whatever recommendation I have. And I mean, all these companies are very professional, right? Nobody is going to just do it because of most of them. I say most companies are very professional, but I mean, I guess they had to try. So they were not getting through to us. They were on the losing end of, one deal, and they wanted we were picking somebody else, and they were trying their best to still get in. I'm like, the data is the data. I mean, it's not going to lie. We had all the analysis. We were showing why we were picking this, and it's not an easy decision, but we were right in what we were trying to do. So, I mean, of course, the head of technology and CEO could have overturned us because it was a close call. They could have said, no, we want to go with this. It's possible. But that didn't win them any positive points from us. Yeah. The second thing is somebody sent me a big gift basket or something.
A physical object.
And I actually returned it or gave it to charity. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's like, I can't even take it, but it's like the wrong thing to do because so I would not advise that.
Never call my phone.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Jeez.
Ever.
It's totally fair, yeah.
I'm sure my phone number's out there in a million places and I can't get it back, but that doesn't mean you can call it.
It happens quite a bit, too.
Yeah.
And it actually just makes you look kind of bad. This isn't honestly the vendor's fault, but similar, like you said, SOC 2 Type 2, kind of get these baseline things for your tool. Have your tool get a pen test done, so my team doesn't find SQL injection on the first day, and especially if it's a small company, they just kind of ruined that vendor was just immediately out, it made me look like kind of an idiot too when I had my team look at it, and it was a day. I'm assuming they put a apostrophe in a parameter or something and had it, but so just make sure it's going to get some muster of somebody poking around in it because they're security people. They're totally going to poke around in that tool. to see if there's issues.
That's funny.
Next, I want to ask about something that we've kind of touched on a little bit already, but it's kind of topical. There were many LinkedIn threads about this last year, which is platform versus best of breed. Adrian, you've already shared your thoughts on where you wish how the industry should evolve, but is that the reality today, right? How do you make decisions around? There's obviously a reason there are still 4,000 vendors, because there are a lot of companies out there that are still buying these point solutions versus just going with the Palo Altos and the CrowdStrikes of the world. So how have you personally thought about these decisions in the past, and what do you think maybe some of these point solution vendors should think about as they think about the future?
I think there's a lot of companies that are still running on VC money, but I don't know what the percentages are. I think best of breed is just like not real. I think there's not sufficient ability to benchmark and do qualitative and quantitative comparison between vendors to be able to determine that something is best of breed. I think they can position themselves and they can describe themselves that way. But I think ultimately we just don't know. And in that sense, I'm all in on platform and overlapping platforms. And where there's, a point solution that's the only thing that solves a specific problem, I think then you got to figure out what are the two maybe best of breed to get similar visibility on pluses and minuses for those specific tools. But yeah, I like you said, I've got a pretty clear position. I just don't buy it.
When we say best of breed, we're saying point solutions, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do I feel about it? So I think I love having a nice platform. My issue with it, so I was on, the Palo Alto train at my last company, and I felt
unfortunately. All right, I take it all back.
So there's a point where I feel like the innovation goes down. So I feel like some of these startups that are coming up, they're doing things differently and thinking about it differently. So there's that. What I want now is tools talking to each other.
Yeah.
That's what I want. So maybe it's not a platform, but some way I want the data to be moving around to all my tools so there's visibility. I can correlate that data, enrich it all. I do not want it just sitting in. I remember I used to have a SOC and they had it looked like 1,000 monitors with all these dashboards. And just like, you really are looking at all this stuff? We have to share data amongst each other. I would love, I guess, like Wiz and those guys are really coming up with a big platform, but I would assume the innovation is going to die down at some point, like they all do with the big guys. I feel like every time Palo Alto buys some cool product, it just kind of goes away. So yeah, I would say my main take is I would love for a platform, and it's way easier for a security team, but if there is a point solution, we need them to talk to each other. My main point there.
Yeah, I think platform is okay, but it's never met all the needs that I have today. They might, and even the best platforms have just not met the need. And whether it's Microsoft, Google, any of these guys, they just don't meet the need. That's why we had to build so many things internally to the company, because they just don't meet the need. Whether it's across all the different systems, the databases and so on that we have, or across the applications or whatever, they just don't meet the need. So that's one thing. Second thing is, to Devin's point, they're not innovative. They just lose that innovative edge. And a lot of the innovation comes from the true innovation of something really unique, and which is solving it extremely well. I've seen come from the startups. So if you have something like that that's really innovative, solving it really well, and you can plug it in and solve it, that I think is definitely valuable, because the big guys, platform guys, just cannot do it at the speed that you would like them to. And it should also solve something you need to solve now. Right? If you're not, if that's not there, then it's like the platform guys will catch up to it. So those are some of the parameters to think about.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time, so and I want to leave plenty of time for the audience to ask some questions as well. So to summarize, right, I think there's maybe a fundamental mismatch between the way vendors build and sell their products and the way folks like you see the world and the way you wish they would sell to you. So if you were to think about this from a framework of areas that vendors can control versus we've talked about some of the internal factors where maybe they don't have so much control over that. If you could just summarize in a couple of bullet points, like what should they focus on and what do you wish they didn't focus on as much, or what is your advice to them in terms of approaching organizations like yours?
I think for the most part, vendors do a pretty good job of describing a problem. They do a pretty good job of describing how they'll help find the problem and explain the problem. I think describing how the tool will get incorporated into the environment and how it will solve the problem on an ongoing basis is where they tend to run into challenges. Awareness of what the workflow is within an organization around how to solve the problem. How do things get tracked? How do we know that resolution is correct? Those sort of are the challenges that a security organization spends most of its time on. And so those vendors that immediately can say, here's how you'll go through a trial, here's how you'll resolve the issues, here's how you'll do testing to make sure that they've been resolved, and here's why you'll never need to look at our dashboard, because it's going to be directly incorporated into the tools that are already being used in an environment. That's a tool where I'm like, awesome. Whatever the number is that I have to pay you is less than the cost that I'm going to incur across the rest of the organization. And so I know that that's going to be successful. And so those are the tools that I'm willing to spend a lot more on, because I know that the full cost is actually able to be seen. But along the way, there's a lot of pitfalls in understanding how a tool is actually going to get incorporated into an environment. And those, I think, are where conversations get more complicated.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And similar to what you just said, and I think salespeople hate me for this because I try to say my whole strategy, like, this is what I'm thinking, this is how I think you're fitting in. I wish that, I want them to know that anytime I purchase a vendor, they're kind of an extension of my team, and they are the expert in this area, and I want to be able to lean on them. I want them to understand my strategy as a whole and how they're fitting in. And some of the good vendors, they actually end up, if I'm assuming if enough people ask for certain features, they build stuff that actually ends up being kind of in my strategy of what I wanted. And they are a true partner and like I said, an extension of my security team. So I just really love to see that. Doesn't happen much, to be honest. It is. It's like you're just trying to solve this one problem. But I really am thinking of how are you in my environment and what is it going to look like in a couple of years and work with everything else and give me this complete picture that I'm kind of looking for.
A great point. I mean, maybe similar to what you folks have been saying. Focus on the sustainable, real ROI, not like the vendor. Really understand what the environment is. Put a real ROI thing together and show value just not first time, but continuous. And focus on it and measure it relentlessly. If you do that, then you'll know if you're delivering value. The person that bought it will know. They can show it to their CISO, CEO, whatever, saying, hey, and they can prove that there's an ROI, that the value of what you're getting. And it's sustainable, and it should keep getting better. So you're innovating along the way. The other thing I think the vendors always want proprietary, and we want people buying it want standards. So go with like good standards and help develop standards, and make your innovation not based on proprietary and stickiness, but maybe a little bit, but like most of it should be based on innovation and better value, right? Otherwise, so we do. I mean, the buyers always want something that, if something goes wrong, you can replace relatively easily. Maybe not too easily, but it's not like, hey, I've developed so much code, it's like it's going to take me 5 years to replace it. Then it's just like a losing proposition.
Amazing. Well, those are all great insights. I've asked all of the questions that I had. I would love to open it up to the audience. Okay, please.
If calling you guys on the phone is clearly not the way to how do
Oh, you'll reach me.
How do you recommend small security vendors and innovative startups, get on your radar?
Oh, I try to help my sales team with this all the time. I actually don't know the answer, but I think relationships, building, like being places. I still go to like SFB sides, like even like little things like that. And the community, security community is super small and everyone talks. So you can easily, like we said before, recommendations from someone goes a long way. I don't know the answer though. Like I don't answer my phone. I actually have unknown numbers turned off because it's so bad. And emails, all my external email goes into a box.
Ooh, I haven't set that up, but that sounds good.
And I have an allow list of if I bought the vendor, then they go into the allow list. But
I think it's referenceable customers, right? I mean, you have to work with like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 customers and make them extremely successful, and maybe then you can build some blogs or like you can show customer success, and then it grows on itself. Because otherwise, you just do a cold call to or a cold email to any of us, be like, okay. But if it's backed with something saying, hey, by the way, we had this amazing study, independent study that's showing that all these customers have tremendous success and we can connect you and they're in your space and they'll be willing to talk to you. And you know the problem is immediately, we need to solve it immediately, then that brings us then you'll get the call.
I don't know. I don't even like talking on the phone, so probably would never be on the phone with me. But yeah, I was joking. But I do hate talking on the phone.
First of all, congrats on going 50 minutes without talking about AI, LLM. It rarely happens these days in any panel. So, but my question goes to that a little bit, that as a CISO, if there was a CISO assistant where you could go and ask information, which could collect information, which could do a bunch of things, what sort of assistant would you look for?
Oh, that's a long question, I feel like.
I'm becoming increasingly convinced that specialization in that space is not that useful. And that the base models that are coming out of OpenAI and name the rest will probably be good enough for nearly all use cases. My team has been doing a fair amount of work on taking those base models and using them for common security problems. You know, take a look at the CV that just came out. Do we have code that looks similar to that in our environment? And you know, are we using any of those libraries in places that we don't know? And that kind of basic inspection, even the base models are pretty good at. So I think, you know, what are the things that are hard as a CISO? Manage my calendar. I still don't understand why there's not a good AI assistant for managing a calendar. We're like 30 years into that problem. Why has nobody solved that?
I know, 100% agree there.
If there's one thing the Google team should have been working on, it's fixing calendar. Managing my calendar, managing who I haven't talked to recently that I need to check in with. So that's like basic people stuff. Yeah. Giving me a list of things that I thought somebody was getting done that aren't actually getting done. Again, basic people stuff. So I don't think there's any like magic security AI that a CISO needs. I think a lot of it is just basic management support, which hopefully the base models will provide because everybody needs executive functioning support.
I have that's a good list. I would like that. I have heard of internal security teams almost using like a chatbot for the organization though, which I find interesting. I have not done this yet. I kind of find it interesting. What's the policy on XYZ? Or I don't know what else they would ask it, but just giving...
If you want to deploy software, like what's the right way to do it? We've heard that use case from a few people.
Yeah, so I could see that. I kind of want to do that. Like I feel like it's a nice way, and it's kind of nice way to create the security team being a little more visible, and I think that's kind of cool. But yeah, I don't know. I don't make PowerPoints for me. I absolutely hate doing that too. But yeah.
Yeah, luckily I don't have any calendar management problems right now, so I'm very happy about that. Hopefully it stays that way. But I think AI is going to be everywhere. I mean, it's so incredible and so powerful that it's going to be everywhere. So I think probably you haven't heard us talk about it because just it's intrinsic at this point. And with DeepSeek, I mean, it's like mind-boggling the kinds of things that are happening at a pace that has just never ever been seen before in my lifetime. So I think it's going to just permeate everything that we do. So I think it's not just like, hey, what does the CISO need? It'll be at every level. People will be using it in some way, shape, or form. If they don't, they're going to be outdated and obsolete. It's already happening. So you have, and why not use it, right? I mean, they're so useful and so powerful for anything you do. So you might as well use it. Like, the only thing is, like, they'll need to figure out within the company how to do it safely, and the privacy data and all those things, protections for AI need to be there. But once that's there, I mean, even just like whether it's incidents or access, anything that you do, put the data and do a private application based on the model training on it. I mean, it's like, it'll give you so much valuable information to the analyst or the manager or the CISO, everybody. So I think I think opportunities are endless to really, and there are lots of possibilities for all the startups out there to like really figure out ways where you can help different teams and reduce the manpower needed and automate it and so on and so forth. Huge opportunities. With things, I mean, you can't even imagine right now some of the things. I can imagine a few, but endless possibilities, I feel, to do stuff.
So going back to the POC thing that you brought up earlier, I'm a sales engineer. My job when I get on a call with one of you is like, do you want a POC? But I mean, I talked to another CISO and he said, that's unrealistic. Like at max, I can do like real serious POCs a year.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many you've got lined up, right? So it's like, what is a reasonable way we can kind of do a way that makes sense?
Not a POC, you're saying something lighter?
Yeah, lighter. Like list out like when you're thinking of like tackling this particular problem you've got. I don't know. I don't want to bug you. I want to add value.
Sure.
But I also want to get there before my competition does, or at least be in the running.
That's a great question, because I mean, usually all these plans are kind of private to the company, and then what you're asking is very valid. But POC comes later in the game, right? First, you want to like say, hey, I want to select the vendor and saying this is actually a potential vendor for us. You'll see demos, and then you might say, okay, because POCs takes the resources from us to do. So you're not going to just do it without like demos and so on is okay. First, just the conversation. That will also happen only if you have a need. Your question is, how do you know whether we have a need and whether the need is now?
Budget, need, authority, timing, all those typical things, right? And I don't want to burden you with like POC too early.
Yeah, you do.
But I mean, then you just do it to get rid of me. And
Yeah.
There either.
Doesn't work again.
I can't think of an instance where we hadn't identified a set of tools to solve a specific problem and begun thinking through the process where a POC just like landed and we thought, oh, let's go do that. I think every instance where we've deployed a tool, the idea of that tool is one that we originated and then we vetted. And we might have talked to somebody a year ago or 2 years ago that had a solution that was in that space, or maybe 6 months ago. But I think like outbound marketing broadly, yes. Actual salesperson getting us to buy, no. I can't think of an instance of that. Closing a deal on a thing where we have pursued it, yes, for sure. But it's almost more of an inside sales than an actual. I can't imagine convincing me to have a POC on something that I wasn't already thinking about buying.
Maybe like a technology partner, like a VAR that stays close to you and sold you other things.
do comparisons with G2?
Yeah, but it's already, like, by the time we go to deploy something, we've already got a short list. Like, by the time we have a conversation or think about doing a POC, we're already on a short list of a problem we're trying to solve. And so you don't need to convince us to do a POC because we already know that we want to do one. So in some sense, the scenario of convincing me to do a POC doesn't compute.
I think it needs to start at a different level.
That's interesting.
maybe the founder of the company needs to have a conversation with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 CISOs to say, hey, what are your top problems? That will, then they know what the top, and then you can go in with that knowledge. Otherwise, it's just going in from the bottom up. It is really hard because most people, it'll be like a lot of no's, and then you're really fishing as opposed to really understanding the space and saying, these are the current top problems, whatever they may be. These are what people are really facing. Even patching is not solved today, right? Patching itself, the basic, it's not solved. So it's a very, very hard problem. You still cannot, people can't patch on time. So is there some really unique way, or is it, and people have been thinking about this, and so if there's something truly unique that you have done and proven and customers can talk about it, then it becomes, hey, I have this really unique thing. Then it may be possible, but even then, it needs to be something that like is really, I think, the company should know that these are the top problems and we are solving one of them in this way and that way, and then there's a possibility that you increase the chance of getting a hit, right? May not be a perfect answer, I'm sorry, but
No,
that
is good. And it's also like, I was thinking of your earlier answer too, of like, of the customers that you do have, hopefully you have some, you just make sure you nail their satisfaction.
You have to,
Yep.
that is,
ask them for references, which has been pretty good for us, so, yeah.
that is crucial.
Yeah, we hit on pretty frequently.
Perfect. I think we have time for, let's just do the last two questions there. So go ahead.
So some of you among the panel have talked about coming up through consulting and advice on getting a basic pen test. Whether your advice changes or
What are they doing?
a GRC or a pen tester.
I'm probably pretty light with that, honestly. I've
No
slapped.
GRC.
No, I'm light with like my GRC team through the procurement process wanted to do this whole like thing on this consulting group. I'm just kind of like, what do they got access to? What are they doing? I'll grant an exception. Whatever, it's fine. I don't know. Is anyone else stricter on that? So if they're coming in and you're putting a laptop and you're going into my prod environment, if you're not Google or somebody big, I'm probably going to want to know like a baseline. Or like, what do you have? What's your security program? What's on, so yeah, I guess depending on what you're doing, if it's just like an external test, nothing. But I have done stuff where I think this feels heavy-handed nowadays. But we actually like scan the consultant's laptop, see what they had for tooling, what benchmarks, CIS or something on it. I forgot exactly. But that feels really heavy-handed nowadays.
But to your point, depends on what they have access to. Right?
Yes,
I mean, like offensive security, if they're really trying to break into some of your application, this is like highly sensitive information. They could actually break in, not tell you about it, keep it secret, and then break in later. So I mean, just like, so you really need to maybe even do employee checks. I mean, have the consultant do it, but show them. So the consultant needs to be some very. I mean, you'll need to have just much more diligence on the vendor from that perspective for those kind of services. GRC maybe a little bit less so because they're not really trying to break in, they're just doing more compliance things, right? So it depends on how deep you want to go with what kind of services they're offering.
This is one where I may have a different view. Almost everything I've worked on for the last, basically my whole career, has been either open source or near open source. And as a result, I don't think we've ever really worried about what would go wrong. I mean, I'm sure conceptually we have, but like my assumption is if a person I've hired can find a vulnerability given the access I've given them, then I'm already screwed because somebody else has probably already found it. So I haven't worried about it too much. So for me, 90% of it is when I'm looking at a services company, it's realizing that what you're buying is somebody's time and it's how good is that person. And so it's not how good are their other engagements, it's not references that they can give for the company, et cetera. It all comes down to who are the 3 consultants or the 5 consultants, where are they going to be, what are they going to be doing, what's their experience previously in this space. So in that sense, it's very, very different. Whereas, which may involve references and things like that. But it usually ends up being a pretty precise transaction at the individual consultant level, which tends to mean, by the way, that we almost never use the real big consulting firms, right? The big four, like, we're not interested in that. It's almost all boutique.
And we sometimes also given people corporate laptops locked down. So that's like, it's much harder to just following the standard company like tools and so on. So it becomes a little bit, again, less risk.
Last question.
How will you almost rushing like this? And right now it's AI and everyone's and hundreds of them. And assess actually a problem and do we actually have it? And it's a different point.
Yeah.
Big technology.
I feel like I'm immune to it now. I've been doing security 20 plus years and it's like commonplace. You just talk to all your peers and everyone talks together, kind of figure it out and kind of learn a little bit, try to figure out what the hell is going on, and then like blow it off or this is real or security community is super small and really close knit, I would say, and we do talk. But yeah, I think I'm kind of immune to it. Like AI is not. Maybe I'm also a positive person.
There's two ways AI is going to end. Either all the companies are run by one AI and it's great because we're told that that's going to happen, or the world is going to end. So neither of those do I need to do anything. Like, in both cases, it's out of my control.
But what did you do when like when all the chatbots were coming out? Did you block them all, or did you just basically say, like any other website, just don't upload something sensitive? Did everyone go out and block it? Wells probably did.
There's like, absolutely. So again, depends on depends on where you are and what the risk is to the company, right? So that's like, it's an existential risk. You have to do different things. The other thing is like, I think just because AI is here doesn't mean ransomware has gone away. Criminals are not saying, hey, by the way, there's AI, so I'll stop doing ransomware. So that's still there. DDoS is still there. All those things are still there. So there's still priorities that have to be done in those areas that are still there, in addition to the AI pieces. So that all the new things needs to be, again, based on the threat landscape to different institutions, the threat actors are attacking different verticals different ways. So you need to understand that and then protect based against those things. That's how the progressive risk reduction priorities are laid out.
And to the ransomware point, EDR was already a product category because we all knew we were supposed to be doing disaster recovery and have a recovery plan that compensated for a possibility of insider threat, which basically that's all ransomware is.
Exactly.
Is it's insider threat with the ability to encrypt rather than delete. So we should have solved that before it happened. And it's inconvenient that it had to be rebranded ransomware for us to realize, oh, we should have been doing EDR. But there were lots of places that already were doing it well that didn't get ransomed. Now, maybe not, your local healthcare provider, maybe not a few of those places. But I think it turns out there aren't that many threats that are truly novel and truly new that weren't written about 35 years ago that just haven't been properly implemented. Right?
We're basically doing the same thing.
Backups, check to make sure the people who are on your network are the ones that are supposed to be there. And you're in pretty good shape.
The backups need to be read-only, right? So that non-writable backup. There's, slight differences, but other than that, you're right.
And are they really back, like, yeah, append only or something, yeah.
Well, great. That brings us to the end of the panel. Shirish, Devin, Adrian, thank you so much for the phenomenal and very candid insights that you've shared with us tonight. I hope everyone here appreciates everything that I know. I've learned a lot. Hopefully you have too. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.